Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to my latest episode here. This is my latest album review roundup for the month. This is for the month of March 2026. I know I'm a little bit late on this, but I had a lot of albums to cover, and I was going to film it last weekend, but I just felt like I needed more time to be able to listen to some of these records, and I still feel like I'm missing a few key albums that I probably would have included if I had even more time. So running a little low on time here these days, but still want to bring to you guys some great recommendations of new albums that I've been loving in the month of March. And that's really the point of these monthly shows, is just to give you a smattering of records to go check out. I'll give you a brief description and my kind of quick impressions about it, and then you can decide if you want to go off and check it out on your streaming service of choice or digital platform or Prog, physical media vendor. I'll have a list in the description of all the albums, so you'll be able to copy and paste into Google or your particular service of choice. So hopefully this will be a way to open you up to some new bands, some new music, and I try to cover a pretty wide range within the world of modern progressive rock. And touch on some related genres, creative, progressive, interesting new music that I think's worth your attention. It's basically a catalog of what I've listened to this month and kind of my brief impressions. And let's get into it. I'm going to try to be real brief because I have 15 albums to talk about today, so there's quite a long list. I feel like as the year keeps rolling on, there's just more and more albums coming in, and I'm also picking up some albums that I didn't quite get to in the month of February, so there's some February holdovers that I wanted to mention here, and so let's get into it. Hopefully you appreciate these episodes. Let me know in the comments. All right, let me move over and I'll show the album cover so you can know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about these albums. Alright, so these are going to be in release date order, so that's how I've decided to put them together. So the first one is the Anaton Project, the Ocean Conductor. This came out February 13th, like I mentioned, a holdover from February. There's about 4 albums that I didn't mention yet in my February roundup that I wanted to make sure to touch upon. This is an Oslo-based progressive band formed by guitarist and vocalist Johnny Norman Berg, whose roots lie in neo-progressive rock. But I feel like this album takes a lot of cues from like post-rock and almost orchestral kind of ambient music as well. It's really beautiful. There's a lot of instrumental passages that take their time to develop. It feels very conceptual in this like kind of pastoral style listen. It's really a beautiful record that I thought was worth mentioning since I didn't quite get around to it last month. There's some narration on certain sections, but I just think there's some beautiful playing here, and it's really peaceful and really a great showcase for a new band that's trying to put their stamp. It's a progressive concept record inspired by classic maritime literature, including the Odyssey, Moby Dick, and The Old Man and the Sea, presenting a cohesive narrative framed by expansive arrangements and thematic songwriting is how they talk about it. So if you want something a bit more cinematic, a bit more, relaxed and atmospheric, but with some really great playing, some post-rock, some analog textures, some heavy guitars at sections, very thoughtful, very moody. This is a record you may want to check out, so I think it's well worth your time and attention, so that's why I thought I'd put it on our list today. Coming out February 13th, another holdover from February. This is Primaluce. This is a prog metal, prog rock band led by Stefano Primaluce, an Italian producer, multi-instrumentalist who's based in Paris. So a little bit of a multinational flavor. And to me, this is like prog metal, but almost in an AOR type style. It's very accessible, very catchy, a lot of hooks. The singer has a very clear voice that pierces through and is very commercial and accessible, I'd say. So I think it's kind of has that Dream Theater DNA that you might expect from a prog metal group of this style, but brings in an AOR-ness kind of like Toto or Journey or something along those lines. And it creates for a really cool listenable record. There's also hints of like other more modern prog bands like Spock's Beard, Enchant, Presto Ballet, that kind of family of hook laden progressive rock. with a little bit of tinge of metal and harder edge to it. But I just found it really enjoyable. It's just a really cool release that spoke to me, that I found very listenable, and that I've been enjoying. So if you like that side of the equation, kind of more accessible, hook-laden, AOR-driven progressive metal, there may be a lot to enjoy on this record. It sounds really great. The production value and everything is really high on this record. So I'd recommend checking it out if you're into those types of things. I believe someone mentioned in the comments of my previous roundup this record, Telegraph, Topography of Mind, from February 22nd release date. This only has like 4 tracks. They're all fairly lengthy proggy style tracks in the 11 to 12 minute range. This is a band that was founded in 2009 in Tel Aviv, Israel. Psychedelic space rock. There's a lot in common with like Pink Floyd perhaps, but I find a lot of influence from like Camel. Very pastoral, very peaceful, light prog, I would say. There's nothing really heavy, there's nothing too intricate or complex here, but it's just very pleasant, spacey, psychedelic, symphonic, pastoral prog, which it's really a joy to listen to. There's kind of some classical influence. Of course, all of the classic prog bands, form some influence here. Genesis and Yes and King Crimson and all of your kind of notable figures. Just really great retro classic prog rock in a more laid-back style that you could just let wash over you, and is just fun for those who like this kind of retro style and longer form tracks that have room to breathe and time to develop and create a very classic feeling record that's 45 minutes, the perfect kind of 70s prog record length. So check it out. Yeah, it's a really cool record, and thanks for the shout out in the past comments for this record. All right, the last of our February holdovers, this is Archive and the album Glass Mines from February 27th. This is crossover prog from the UK. This is a bit off the beaten path of some of these other choices. This is much more modern sounding, maybe more prog adjacent than full-on prog music. It's very accessible. It's kind of electronic sounding. It reminds me a little bit of like a Radiohead, perhaps, with a little bit of more of electronic, modern kind of angle to it, but it's really well done. This band, apparently, Archive, started off as a trip-hop group back in 1994, but it's kind of developed into this more prog electronic kind of feel, with modern instrumentation and modern soundscapes. Maybe even think about early, like Porcupine Tree has that kind of psychedelia kind of feel, but brings in a modern production styles, doesn't sound like it's too far removed from like modern indie rock flavor as well. Maybe even think of some like The Cure and like 80s kind of synth pop music, that's kind of baked into this as well. So a great synthesis of different sounds, can be melancholic and hypnotic, and moments of more aggressive rock that pop in when they need to. Some really great, beautiful vocals, some slow burn intensity, some really cool atmospheres on this, and I just thought it was a really great record. It's a really lengthy record. I believe it's like 75 minutes in length, but every track has something that really can grab your ear, and that is a really good listen, especially if you want something a bit more modern, not really too far delving into the past too much, doing something truly new and innovative and progressive. I think this is a kind of a cool record if you like a little bit more of the poppier side of the prog equation. There's a lot of cool stuff on this record. All right, next we've got Terravia, A New World. This came out March 2nd. This is a prog metal band from Norway, founded in 2021. And this is your classic prog metal, definitely shades of Dream Theater. Think of like Train of Thought, Systematic Chaos kind of era of Dream Theater, Circus Maximus. There's a bit of like an Opeth kind of style. There's definitely some harsh vocals throughout this record, so if you're opposed to the harsh vocals, which I know a lot of my audience is, this probably isn't for you. But I found it to be tolerable. I'm obviously not the biggest harsh vocal fan either, but when it's done tastefully and when it's mixed well with clean vocals, I can handle it pretty well, because I do understand a lot of times what they're going for with the harsh vocals, kind of more of an aggressive nature to describe kind of darker subject matter and lyrics. But when it's so ever present and just that's all there is just heaviness and darkness and harsh vocals, it just is too much for me. I like when it's varied between some clean singing moments, and I think this does that really well. So there's some really lengthy tracks here, as you might expect from a prog record. A New World, the title track that closes the record, is 17 minutes long. And you've got some like 12, 11, and 10-minute tracks here. The only short track here is Strive to Endure, which is 6.5 minutes. But excellent virtuosic playing, some heavy moments, obviously, some great metal with prog leanings. The beginning of A New World starts kind of spacey and Pink Floydy before it gets into the more standard Dream Theater kind of mode. And it's just really great and well done. I think it's really solid progressive metal. If you're into kind of classic prog metal of the Dream Theater, style vein, Circus Maximus, Symphony X, that kind of world, this is kind of a no-brainer pick, and just a really strong record from a new band that I hadn't heard of before. So this is a real great step in the right direction for them, and I'd be curious to see where they move forward from this record. So a cool shout out for a March record here. I mentioned this last year. This is Our Oceans, Right Here, Right Now, and they did a kind of an unconventional release schedule for this record. They released it physical only, I think, on CD through their website, and they released a couple tracks as sort of an EP to get a taste for the record on streaming and digital services. But the full record wasn't available in a digital or streaming format. So now it's available on streaming services, and so I wanted to point your attention towards it. It came out March 6th on Bandcamp and Apple Music and Spotify and all the different places. So I was able to finally get a chance to hear the full record after really loving the initial tracks on the EP, which was basically like the first 4 tracks or so of the record. But now getting to hear the full thing, I'm in love with this record. I think it's excellent. Crossover prog from the Netherlands, a band that was formed in 2013. This is their 3rd record. And this is for fans of like Porcupine Tree, Steven Wilson, maybe Pineapple Thief kind of stuff, Radiohead, Ocean Size. It's got that kind of modern prog angle with that alternative kind of sound, but it's so well done, so expertly crafted, great vocals. This one, from what I understand, I haven't heard the previous 2 records they did, but I think this one is a softer tone. It's not quite as heavy as some of their previous records, but there's a lot of hooks, a lot of great choruses, and the singer just has an excellent voice and just really well technically composed music, really caring about the song first and not just over-the-top technical mastery, and it creates for a great list of tracks that I want to recommend. So I recommended it last year, but now that it's available as a more wide release, I thought it was worth putting in the list today as well. And it provides this kind of weird, like, I'm always big on what my favorite albums of the year are and crafting my top list. And I don't know if this should be included as a 2025 release or on the list for 2026. I'm going to have to make that determination if it qualifies to be on my list of favorite albums for 2026. But if it does qualify, if I decide to slip it in there, this would be in my list of, my favorite 10 to 12 records that I've heard this year so far, on track to be placing pretty highly on that year-end list. So I really like this one. Maybe not super proggy, but has that kind of art rock, more modern alternative kind of feel to it, and it's just excellently done. Great production, great sound, great playing, great melodies, and I just love it. So that's a really strong recommendation from me. Next, we've got a unique record here. This is Floating Nest with their album Blow Off Steam. This came out March 7th. Heavy prog from Spain. A new band, as far as I know. It seems like they were founded in 2019 in a small town in Sweden. So it's a really interesting, complex style of music here. It's heavier, has almost tinges of like a metal feel, slightly psychedelic, kind of this interesting djent and prog metal influence as well. Eclectic prog, you might say. Female vocals, I feel like the female vocalist on this record, Sarah Gaspar, is a little bit of an acquired taste. It took some time for me to get used to her vocals because they're a little bit unconventional, a little bit different, but it gives it kind of almost an avant-garde kind of feel to this music, but not so off the beaten path that it's like hard to listen to. It's still very listenable and has some really interesting, great moments. So I found a lot to enjoy here. It's very eclectic, very interesting. It's hard to even describe what's on board here, so you probably just have to kind of give it a test to it to see if it's your kind of style. But yeah, really cool Spanish experimental prog, heavier leaning, with some really cool theatrical style female vocals. Makes for a really interesting record that I wanted to mention on my list today. Also, we've got, this is not as well known, I think. I couldn't find much information about this on the internet, but this is Blending Borders and the album A Quiet World. This came out March 7th as well. Band from Austria, and they're kind of the like Deer Hunter style mold, not truly like retro prog, symphonic prog, but more of this indie prog movement of more modern sounds, this kind of modern alternative, but with some disparate influences to kind of shake things up. In particular, I think it was Last Day, the 5th track on the record, that has these horns that come about that bring this kind of jazzy, funky kind of flavor. That's kind of where I thought about kind of modern Deer Hunter stuff. But there's some almost reggae in the early tracks as well, and they just like to move between different things in their sound, even though it's a pretty accessible sound that doesn't vary wildly from like modern alternative rock kind of music, but they infuse enough interesting elements. I think it's worthy of kind of having this crossover prog appeal, kind of like Deer Hunter does. So really cool. It's a band I hadn't heard of before that kind of just came to my attention. It seems like they've been around since about 2015. They had a concept record in 2023. But this is just a really cool album, an album that's confronting the themes of depression, isolation, loss, and death. And the band is adopting a harder, more direct and rock-driven approach on this record compared to their previous. Captivating energy, intensity. They have a very charismatic stage presence, apparently, and a connection to their audience, so they're very much interested in live performance. And their energy and enthusiasm, I think, comes through on this record to make a really solid rock record with some different influences that makes it kind of more interesting and proggy than like your just standard indie rock that you might hear otherwise. So check it out if you're into like Deer Hunter and that kind of indie prog stuff. This might be up your alley. All right, another really solid, strong recommendation from me. This is right up my wheelhouse, personally. If you know my channel and the kinds of music that I enjoy, think about, Moron Police, Kairos, those style bands, younger bands that are kind of infusing a bit of pop elements into their prog music. And this is Major Parkinson, their album Valesa Chapter 2, Viva the Apocalypse. And this is just a joy. Eclectic prog from Norway. They've been around for a while. They were founded in 2003. They have, I believe this is their 6th record. This is a Chapter 2. They did Chapter 1 in 2022. Velvet Prison was the name of that record. It didn't quite connect to me as much as I was hoping after hearing the descriptions and people compare it to the different bands that I'm really a big fan of. But this one is where I really paid attention, because this record is a joy to listen to. I just absolutely love every moment of it. There's so many fun pop kind of music influences to it, but it doesn't lose its like quirky, proggy sensibility either. It's a collision of synth pop, new wave, cinematic and psychedelic prog rock, art rock, South American vibes, bossa nova, disco. They just throw everything at the wall. They have a very unique lead singer as well. He has a very deep voice, this kind of, which kind of is an interesting juxtaposition to this really poppy, fun, kind of danceable music, and you've got this really dark, melancholic, low voice that's singing over it. It's very ominous and kind of doomy in a way, but it's kind of fun combination of different things. And there's different like featured singers here as well, some female vocals, especially in the last couple tracks. But the middle of the record is just some of the best music of the year, from Father Superior, Viva the Apocalypse, The Doctor in Command. That whole section of the record is just absolutely fantastic and fun. And I would just listen to the title track on repeat. It's just such a fun, joyful, danceable song, but about very dark subject matter. It's fun music. It's really exciting. And I definitely recommend it highly if you're into that. If you're into the more poppier elements of prog and a younger band that's making their mark in this kind of art prog, art rock scene, I think it's just excellent. So enjoy. Hopefully you'll go out and listen to that one. Next, I wanted to briefly cover a couple of albums by like classic prog bands. First, I have Soft Machine and their album 13, which came out March 13th. A legendary Canterbury scene band from the UK. And this is a really fun record. It's very much what you'd expect from like a Soft Machine. It has that Canterbury feel, kind of a jazzy vibe to it, pastoral and dreamlike atmosphere. It's definitely free jazz and all those elements. You hear definitely Theo Travis, saxophone, flute, mellotron, pianos, electronics. So you hear those style vintage kind of elements. And if you like your jazzy Canterbury style prog rock, you can't really go wrong with it. It's just very solid for what it is, and an enjoyable listen, something fun to put on in the background and to kind of bring back the past and that 70s feel with warm instrumentation, and definitely a solid release for them. And in a similar vein, we've also got Gong and their album Bright Spirit, another Canterbury scene band, very much a classic band that most people know of in the prog community. This came out also on March 13th. And this is a solid record too. I really liked this. I feel like where Soft Machine is a bit more in the jazz world, this is a bit more in the psychedelia kind of world. This has kind of like a space rock, cosmic kind of atmosphere to it. The current lineup is led by Kavis Tarabi, who brings his own unique stamp to this. But really excellent track list here. I really like a lot of the songs. And it's just really solid. There's some really memorable hooks, some really cool playouts, and just a cool progressive spirit that evokes back into the 70s, into this classic material with modern production. So what more could you ask from some legendary bands kind of bringing in new blood and new fresh spirit into their music? I really enjoy it. So I thought this was a really solid record. Then, of course, I've already done a full review of this, so I'll just very briefly mention it. So check out my full review, but this is the Deer Hunter and their album Sunya. This came out March 20th, and I absolutely adore this record. It's fairly short. It's a 42-minute record, but it packs a punch. It continues in the Anti world of this kind of funky, jazzy feel, maybe a bit of like a 70s Motown, soul kind of feel with some Stevie Wonder influences at parts, but still core Deer Hunter. It still has their voice and their sound and brings it into a kind of a modern era in this kind of sci-fi-ish concept world. So fabulous. One of my favorite records of the year, could be in contention for my favorite record of the year. It's really up there, and the more I listen to it, the more it unpacks these layers and continues to develop for me. I just think it's excellent. I know it hasn't really touched everyone quite the same way as me. I know there's several of my friends who are huge Deer Hunter fans where this just kind of left them cold, or they consider it one of their weaker records. But for me, it packs a punch. It's excellent. It's supremely consistent. And I just have listened to it on repeat countless times, dozens and dozens and dozens of times over the past week and a half or 2 weeks that I've been listening to it. So highly recommend it. I couldn't give you more of a recommendation on this one. Such an excellent record. Next, I thought I'd mention Tusmørke on their album Balderdom. This came out March 20th as well. This is prog folk, avant prog, symphonic prog, whatever prog you want to mention, from Norway. A fantastic, eclectic group of musicians playing classic retro prog rock, and it's just absolutely fantastic. Really fun to listen to. The final track is really, to me, the standout piece. There's a 20-minute epic, Lichtjalv, which I think they've been working on for like multiple decades. Like, it's a project that's been in the works for quite some time, but it came across really incredible on this release. It's a fusion of folk, psychedelic rock, retro, 70s material, very ritual kind of atmospheric sound, using ethnic instruments in this kind of unique setting. It feels very like primal, very like old-fashioned, but really enjoyable to listen to for like a classic vintage prog fan. I think anyone who has some kind of knowledge about 70s folk and prog music can find something to enjoy here on this record. The Norwegian scene, as has been mentioned many times before on my channel and other prog channels, Norway's really got a great, thriving progressive rock scene, and they're one of the leading figures of it, so I thought I'd mention their latest release in my roundup today. Another album that I am absolutely in love with, I probably should have spotlighted this on its own, honestly, because of how much I love it and how much it's going to probably factor into my year-end top list. But this is Legs on Wheels and the album Gobble that came out on March 24th. I believe it was out on their Bandcamp like March 10th, and then they released it more widely on streaming services on March 24th. So now it's available to go listen to if you subscribe to any of those services. Eclectic prog from the UK. To me, as I've been describing it, as basically Gentle Giant reincarnated as a post-punk band in this kind of windmill type scene. You know, think about Black Country New Road, Black Midi, Jordy Griep and, Squid, those kinds of bands. But it has that kind of quirky Gentle Giant humor kind of quality to it. There's moments on the record that really remind me of classic 70s Gentle Giant. There's some Zappa-esque humor and style to it as well. It's very off the beaten path and kind of, avant-garde in certain ways, but it's very listenable, very tuneful, very, I don't like things that are just wacky for the sake of wacky, but I feel like the tunes here are very melodic, very interesting, very cool to listen to. And that's, to me, the superpower of a band like Gentle Giant, is where they're playing things that are pretty complex and intricate and like this kind of musical puzzle, but it still sounds really good. It still is listenable as a song and has great melodies and things that stick with you and are enjoyable to listen to. It's not just this weird like sound poem of weird, wild sounds and styles. So every track is fun on this record. It's absolutely a blast to listen to this band and their development here. I believe this is their second full-length record. I need to check out their first one, but I've heard this one's kind of a leap up from that one, so I have a feeling that this is kind of their premium material. Mix of psychedelic pop, punk, prog, jazz, and more. You could tell they're influenced by a lot of different things. You could hear a bit of that, like, Cardiac's, XTC kind of feel as well. Punky kind of spirit, but, done with some intricate instrumentation and, bringing in a lot of these prog elements to the table. So absolutely fantastic record. It's fun, it's fresh, it's vibrant, it's youthful. I like hearing younger musicians bringing this prog style to focus. It showcases there's still a vibrancy in this genre. It's not just a bunch of, older bands who are grasping onto their, glory days from the 70s. This is a new, vibrant young band who are exciting, who are trying to bring exciting new music to the table to a younger generation, and I can't champion it enough. I think this is fabulous, so check it out. It's a must listen, in my opinion. If you're a fan of Gentle Giant, if you're a fan of quirky, eclectic prog and are curious about this, I think it's well worth your time to at least check out. Next, we've got EchoVerse and their album Fall Towards the Sky, which came out March 27th. This is a Christian prog rock band, very much in the vein of like Neil Morse band and that type of material, Kansas, kind of this melodic, accessible prog rock style, with tinges of like an AOR or a classic rock kind of style, but really well done, really great, vocals, really great playing. This is their second record, and I feel like it's a pretty big step up from their first record. They're coming into their own sound. It's a little bit more unique, and you can start to see their personality shining through, and that they're not just covering the retro prog bands that they obviously are influenced by. They're stepping out on their own a little bit here, and there's some really interesting proggy stuff on here. I really like The Serpent and the Schism, which is track 4. It has a really cool, psychedelic, proggy angle to it that sets it apart from the rest. But a lot of great hooks and choruses and, memorable moments throughout the record. The title track is also a really excellent longer piece. So definitely check this out if you're into that. And I don't think I mentioned Christian prog rock band, but I don't think they're overly preachy or anything of that nature. Similar to like what Neil Morse does. They definitely have that kind of a leaning lyrically, but it's not too in your face. I think it works well for any prog fan, and it's a really cool record with some interesting themes, interesting sounds, great playing, and a great blend of like this classic prog with this AOR style. So I wanted to mention it in the list here. And finally, in the more heavier extreme prog style vein, this is Only Human and the album Planned Obsolescence, released March 27th. And, this is heavy prog metal, so if you don't like the harsher, screamy vocals, then you might want to stay away from this one. It definitely has a mixed vocal approach, but they have excellent clean vocals as well. And probably the best comparison here is something like Tesseract, maybe a little bit of like a Periphery kind of sound, but very modern, definitely at the forefront of this kind of modern prog metal movement, with Tesseract and Leprous and Haken and all those style bands. You get a little bit of a flavor of that kind of stuff, but a really cool melodic feel to it, some really great catchy earworms and some interesting tracks here, and it has a really interesting theme to the record. They're basically talking about AI and how destructive and problematic it can be, this AI-based malaise. This is a Danish prog metal band, and they really have come out swinging. This is their debut record, and I really like what they're doing here. Like I said, it's right on the borderlines of what I can accept when it comes to like the harsh vocals and stuff, but it's not constant. There's definitely a lot of great clean singing, and their clean singing is really well done, and you get comparisons to like Daniel Tompkins, who's the lead singer currently of Tesseract, and you get a little bit of like that metalcore kind of style, but they have moments where it feels a bit more cinematic, a bit more wider in scope, and you can lay back into the groove a little bit more, instead of being pummeled by constant heaviness. So I think there's a lot of good variation here, but it definitely is in line with the modern, like heavier progressive metal. If you don't like the extreme prog metal, this might not be for you, but if you're willing to dip your toes into those waters, I think this is a really solid release in that style vein. So I wanted to mention it in this episode. Alright, so that's what I have for you guys today. Hopefully you enjoyed the roundup of releases. There's so many others that I could have mentioned as well, and I'm sure many of you will mention them in the comments section. Some records that came out in late March that I just feel like I haven't gotten to yet or heard enough to really talk intelligently about them, so they may be holdovers for my April roundup. And records that came out this weekend that I'm filming this, like Engine de Poitrine came out with their record, which is really fun. Green Carnation came out with their record that's really cool as well. So there's definitely some cool stuff brewing, but I wanted to mention these albums before we're already halfway into April, and I haven't mentioned my March roundup. So that's what I have for you today. 15 records. It's a pretty wide gamut of interesting releases there. I think there should be something for every prog fan. And let me know in the comments, like I mentioned, if your thoughts on these records I've talked about, or of course mentioning other records that I didn't mention that you've been really loving, and they could end up making the cut into next month's roundup, which happened with a few of the picks that I mentioned at the beginning of this episode. So thank you guys so much for joining me. Hopefully you like these roundup episodes. I know they can get a little bit lengthy, but I think it's a cool way to just get a smattering of cool new music recommendations, which is really what I want the channel to be centered on. So thank you guys, and enjoy the music. I'll see you later. Bye, everybody.